Before we continue, Mr. Traldi, I would like to briefly address what may be not a significant issue. Mr. Groom, you commenced this morning your submissions by saying that the prosecution will respond to General Mladić's motion requesting that this chamber enter a judgment of acquittal on all counts of the indictment on the grounds that there is no evidence capable of supporting a conviction. Now, the chamber is not aware of any motion. The chamber is aware of the defense having announced and asked for an opportunity to make submissions so as to assist the chamber in fulfilling its duties under Rule 98 bis. Then later on, you said that many of the counts had been left uncontested. Again, but perhaps I'm also addressing you, Mr. Mladić. The chamber understands the situation as that the defense wanted to make submissions so that the chamber could fulfill its duties under Rule 98 bis, and in that context made specific submissions on charges or counts in the way as you did, and which I think you enumerated in 4 specific items. Of course, leaving the duties of the chamber under Rule 98 bis in respect of any other matter still in existence. Is that how we have to understand?
You're correct, Your Honors.
Mr. Groom, is it clear now, or Rule 98 bis doesn't speak about a motion? It's and there's no motion before the chamber.
Understand, Your Honor.
Yes. Thank you. Having clarified this matter, Mr. Traldi is invited to continue his presentation of argument.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was about to turn to the JCE members' campaign. General Mladić's integral role is most visible in that campaign's rapid escalation after he formally assumed the post of commander of the VRS main staff. You can see on slide C7 a first Kreiner Corps document from 21 May 1992, noting his appointment and the establishment of unified command, and in this excerpt, noting the need to, quote, struggle for complete separation from the Muslim and Croatian peoples. Within days, the VRS was conducting large-scale operations throughout Bosnia. A senior VRS officer testified that cleansing territory on ethnic grounds was a regular feature of those operations. That's at T5012, 5013. The criminal nature of these operations is evident from Bosnian Serb documents. You can see the RS MOOPS report of the killing or wounding of hundreds of inhabitants of non-Serb villages in Prijedor on slide C8. These attacks are charged as incidents A6.1 through 6.3. The defense suggested yesterday that the prosecution had not specifically identified the perpetrators. Instead, this is one of many instances where the crimes were committed in the context of a large-scale operation under VRS command by joint Serb forces subordinated to their local commander, then their corps commander, and then, of course, to General Mladić. Regarding operations in Prijedor at this time, I refer you also to P2243 and 2875. Other municipalities saw similar cleansing operations. P2889 and 3294, for instance, describe operations in Sanski Most. And while the defense challenged the identity of the perpetrators of two other scheduled incidents in Drum and Kanyari around this time, in each case, the chamber received evidence that the perpetrators included soldiers in uniform. I'd refer your honors to P2489 and 3391. Slide C9 shows how these operations were carried out on the other side of Bosnia. Major Andrić ordered expulsions of women and children from the Birac area in an organized, coordinated way, and that all the men had to be kept in camps for exchange. You can see this applied in, for instance, P3737, P524, P4004, and P3170, page 46. Back in the ARC, P3872 shows a similar policy to what we see here, and P3599 and 3600 show the thousands deported to Croatia in the campaign's implementation. A summary of some of the key evidence about the campaign in late May and early June is on slide C10. Bosnian Serb authorities completed these operations by expelling most women and children and confining men, whether or not they were armed or fighters, in detention facilities in terrible conditions. Reports to Mladić around this time reflected significant numbers of prisoners, including women and children, held all around the country, the ARC, Rajlovac, Ilidža, Suzica. All of those are facilities where we've shown large-scale crimes were committed. The creation of detention facilities accelerated after the operations in late May because the VRS had taken so many non-Serbs prisoner. As you can see on slide C11, Batković camp, for instance, was created at General Mladić's order. I'd refer you also to P189 and P377. Serious crimes were committed at Batković, several prisoners killed. At T9355, one Bosnian Serb witness called the camp a disgrace. Yesterday, the defense asserted that the evidence was not sufficiently specific as to perpetrators of crimes at Batković. Of course, again, the commander remained in the VRS chain of command, subordinated to the East Bosnia Corps and to Mladić, and the guards subordinated to him. Indeed, all of the camps charged in the indictment fell within either the military or police chains of command, directly subordinated to members of the JCE. One example from around this time illustrates how the military and police cooperated in committing crimes in these facilities. In early June, shortly after the operations in the ARC, a delegation of high-ranking 1KK officers, including General Talić, visited their new camp at Mladić. They could see blood on the prisoners' faces and on their clothing. The 1st Krajina Corps then coordinated with the Sanski Most crisis staff to transfer from Sanski Most to Mladić politicians, extremists, and those unwelcome in the municipality. That's T3001 and P2409 and 3255. And P2362 shows those unwelcome in the municipality meant basically all non-Serbs. In that transfer, at least 6 people were killed, This incident, B1.1, is another for which the defense suggested yesterday the VRS bore no responsibility. Instead, it compellingly illustrates the cooperation between JCE forces in committing crimes related to the detention camps. The next slide, C12, shows a selection of witness evidence that detention of non-Serbs was done arbitrarily on a large scale by the VRS and served as a tool in forcibly removing non-Serbs. The Bosnian Serb authorities described their policy similarly. Slide C13 shows Minister Stanisic reporting to President Karadzic that the VRS was to arrest as many Muslim civilians as possible. Many had been placed in camps with poor conditions run by the MUP. I'd refer your honors also to P3874. The defense stated yesterday that certain camps involved RS MUP perpetrators. As reflected here, of course, that's true and has always been part of our case. The camp system illustrates how these different JCE members and their forces cooperated in implementing their common criminal purpose. While Minister Stanisic refers in this document to camps run by the MUP, detainees in camps run by the VRS were primarily civilians as well. P221 is a Mladić camp report from July 1992, just days after this document, and it states clearly what Mladić was: a camp for segregation of Muslims and Croats, which history will not forgive us. In early June 1992, witness Wilson had challenged Mladić and RS presidency member Plavšić about the massive detention of non-Serb civilians. That's at T3997. But it continued throughout the war. I'd refer you to, for instance, P355, page 63, P2886, P3808, and P4008. This next slide shows the interrelated nature of the camp system. For instance, General Mladić could task multiple camps in the same order through his chain of command, as he did in P201 and P2879. This map labels the detention facilities charged in Schedules B and C. The solid blue lines show areas where people were transferred from one municipality to another to move them to or from one of the camps where General Mladić is charged with crimes. You can see the large number of dotted lines representing transfers between charged camps, and the large number of lines pointing to the centers at Mladić in the northwest and Kula near Sarajevo. Of course, dozens of other camps pockmarked the landscape of Bosnia. And on the left side of the map, you can see what P2225 shows, that one witness was held in 7 different detention facilities in the Sarajevo area during the summer of 1992, including Kula prison. That's only possible because the camps were a single coordinated system. Why hold tens of thousands of civilians in camps? Because they were part of implementing the permanent forcible removal of non-Serbs. You can see on the next slide, C15, green lines showing releases into either Croatian or Muslim-held territory in Bosnia. For instance, when Mladić was closed at the main staff's order, the VRS deported some detainees to Croatia. You can see that green line on the left side of the map. Other detainees were sent to other camps in the Bosnian Serb system and hidden from the international community. While many non-Serbs were held in camps, operations to ethnically cleanse remaining villages continued through the summer and fall. I'd refer you to P520 regarding Ključ, and P2440 regarding Prijedor. Yesterday, the defense suggested that the prosecution had not specifically identified the perpetrators of crimes committed during these operations. Those relate to Prijedor A65 through A69 inclusive, and Kluch A3.3. Again, these were coordinated operations under clear VRS command. For Prijedor, I'd refer you also to P2365, P2432, and transcript pages 17805 through 17807, among others. The Prijedor operations are particularly illustrative. An officer from the 6th Brigade told RM95 that the Muslim areas of Burdo and Bishchani would be cleansed even though the population had surrendered their weapons. Non-Serbs from those areas were then massacred in a number of different villages. Others were brought to Karatermino Marska, where hundreds more were killed. And the group that collected the bodies of the non-Serbs, who had been killed in just one of these areas, Bishchani, had to make 19 separate stops to pick up dead bodies. The campaign continued to devastate the Bosnian Muslim and Croat communities with massacres throughout the summer and early fall. I'll just briefly refer to one with which your honors are very familiar: evidence regarding the massacre at the Grabovica school. I refer to it because it illustrates, like those operations, much about the persecutory campaign. General Mladić had been personally involved in negotiations regarding the surrender of Večići. The war presidency had followed his instructions. That's in P2884. And then his forces, VRS forces, captured fleeing Muslims, took them to the school, and massacred at least 150 prisoners. This next slide, C16, shows the massacre was reported up the chain of command to the main staff, and that the next day, the 1st Krajina Corps reported that the same prisoners had been killed in combat, or the same number of persons. No VRS soldiers were ever punished, and almost all of the victims' bodies are still missing. Having cleansed most of the areas they claimed, the JCE members then turned their focus to the remaining enclaves in the Drina Valley. Regarding the state of the campaign at this point, I'd refer you to exhibits P320 and P2013. General Mladić issued an order creating the Drina Corps, P3659. Huge parts of the area it would cover had already been ethnically cleansed, and now the JCE members had a new VRS corps to finish the job. It would include brigades under Rajko Kuzic and Svetozar Andrić. Krstić's 2nd Romania Motorized Brigade became part of it soon afterwards. Each had already been responsible for serious crimes. On 8 November, after the massacre at Grabovica, Mladić met with his corps commanders and JCE members Karadzic and Krajisnik. Slide C17 reflects some of his notes of that meeting. Here, Mladić records that Krajisnik noted, quote, "We have achieved the corridor and separation with the Muslims," and then summarized, "The most important objective is the task assigned to Jovanovic," who evidence shows was the commander of the Drina Corps, "the mopping up of the Drina. The most important task is separation from the Muslims." Days later, Mladić signed Directive 4, P1968. It called for driving the enemy army out of the Drina Valley with the Muslim civilian population. And the Drina Corps issued an implementing order, which was equally clear, and it read, in pertinent part, "Force the Muslim local population to abandon the area of Srpska, Žepa, Srebrenica, and Gorazde. That's P2095. Many of the people in these enclaves had already been driven out of their homes, and during this campaign, many were re-expelled to Srebrenica. Witness Osmanovic summarizes it eloquently on slide C20. His family, C18 now, I'm sorry, I've done a little bit of cutting during the break. His family is just one of many which was driven from hamlet to hamlet or camp to camp by the implementation of the JCE. The main staff and its representatives were directly involved in cleansing this area, and on 15 February 1993, the main staff issued an attack order, P2218, which noted the enclaves had, quote, the burden of a large number of civilian refugees, and used the ethnic slur Poturice. Villages in the targeted area were destroyed and burned. I want to turn to one last massacre to which the defense referred to yesterday at length, the massacre at Shkroljevice, charged at A7.5. The defense told you yesterday that military police arrested the perpetrators, but failed to mention that VRS and SDS officials intervened to have those perpetrators released. That's at P2362, 2371, and 2375. And it's clear from P3294 that one was a former paramilitary who had been incorporated into the VRS. Contrary to some of the defense arguments, far from wanting to stop this paramilitary from committing further crimes, VRS and SDS officials intervened to protect him from punishment when he was part of the murder of a group of unarmed Bosnian Croats. This incident is certainly relevant to the Chamber's assessment of the incorporation of paramilitaries. Indeed, as the VRS consolidated control over its targeted areas and expelled their non-Serb populations, many of the commanders whose units committed the worst crimes in the municipalities were promoted through the ranks. This last slide, C19, shows some examples. Several of the same perpetrators committed more crimes under General Mladić's command later in the war, like Krstić and Kusic. Taking this campaign as a whole, the evidence of the crimes in the municipalities is clear, reliable, and overwhelming. A comprehensive review of each incident would require much more time. However, the evidence I have discussed, even in this limited time, is amply sufficient for the Chamber to dismiss the challenges to incidents addressed in counts 1 and 3 through 8. Accordingly, I'll ask Mr. McCloskey to discuss the evidence showing how Mladić led the genocide at Srebrenica.
Good afternoon, Your Honors, everyone.
You're moving ahead a bit too quickly. It's still the morning, Mr. McCloskey.
Thank you. I can't quite get the clock from here. It's not my purpose today to go over an exhaustive account of the Mladić's involvement in the Srebrenica genocide. You've heard that evidence, and we all saw you listen very carefully with plenty of questions. I will refer you to my opening statement, where I do identify some of the key links in our basic theory of our case, as well as our trial brief, where we identify some of the key evidence. What I do want to do here in this roughly 40 minutes that I have is respond to Mr. Mladić's sometimes specific challenges. Now, as you saw, most of his challenges had to do with the weight of the evidence or the credibility, which, as we know, is not really what this kind of a challenge is about. But I will want to respond to it to give you a better context of how to look at some of this material. I want to start off with his challenge to Directive 7. He suggested in his comments that Mladić was somehow separate from Directive 7. And he stated, Mr. Mladić stated, that the, and I quote, "Corps commanders should not have reacted to Karadić's directive before receiving Mladić's orders as a result of the directive." This is absolutely wrong. General Mladić and his main staff don't have the time nor energy and ability, as you've learned from the documents themselves and from the description of the experts, to lay out the details of combat plans. This is left to his corps, and we see this from the documents when we look at, for example, Krivaya 95. This is an operation by the Drina Corps that's approved by the main staff. It's not the other way around. So the Drina Corps is not waiting to develop a combat plan based on Directive 7. Of course, we understand the reason why Mr. Mladić wants to separate Mladić from Directive 7 because of its two now famous and criminal aspects. I won't go over that. You've heard it probably 100 times. The first, create an unbearable situation of total insecurity for the inhabitants of Srebrenica. 1. 2, the creation of an unobtrusive system of permits to make the population dependent on their goodwill. It's important to understand just how involved General Mladić is, and I want you to actually, I'm not going to show you many documents, but I do want you to see the front, P1469. This is Directive 7, and this should be the cover letter. Should come up. That you may recall was in the name sent out from the Chief of Staff of the main staff, General Mladić. Yeah, here it is. General Mladić, who you've learned is the one person that can issue orders aside from Mladić, is on this document sending out Directive 7. And he wants the Corps to confirm receipt of the above-mentioned directive by returning a copy of this document. Now, I think you understand at this point, when General Mladić sends out a document from the main staff that to his Corps, they understand this is very serious order. And General Mladić is just as big a part of this as General Mladić and President Karadić, who actually signed the order. Go back to the testimony of the Chief of Operations, Obradović, and others explain to us how directives are made. They're made at the main staff by the sectors, the expert sectors, be they morale, legal, religious, security, operations, logistics. All those staffs get together and they create this document, and it's put together by the Chief of Operations and Training, Directive 7 in this case, General Mladić. You'll recall that his name is the person that drafted it. So this is a main staff document created by the main staff, sent to President Mladić, who reviews it, signs it. As we see, it gets sent back to the main staff. The main staff sends it out. And you'll remember the words of Directive 7, by well-organized planning and planned and organized combat operations, create an unbearable situation. So Mladić is every bit a part of this directive as Mladić and Mladić. Now the language, we may never know who put in that famous criminal language. Did Mladić put it in, or did Mladić put it in? It sounds very similar to the chief of the Bratinats Brigade's report in July 4th, 1994, P1505, that also talks about creating an unbearable situation. But, Your Honors, it's important to understand who wrote it does not matter. They both own this. There is no dual chain of command problem. Mladić is the supreme commander, as we know. Mladić is the commander of the main staff, which is the corps and the army. They both own it militarily. They both are responsible for it. Mr. Mladić also, well, and for Butler's words on that topic, you can see transcript 16158 to 16160. Mr. Mladić also makes the argument that Mladić's Directive 7.1, which comes out March 31st, shortly after Directive 7, somehow replaces the criminal language of Directive 7. This is just not correct. It's clear when you look at the documents side by side, Directive 7.1 cites Directive 7. And Directive 7.1 is very specific, and it involves combat operations not involving the enclaves. And it doesn't suggest anything significant about the enclaves. The wording in Directive 7 remains valid and important. We know this because General Zivanovic, in Exhibit P1468, sent out on March 20th, before Directive 7.1, I'll tell you, but he cites to Directive 7 in the same exact language to the Drina Corps, the illegal language. But very importantly, on July 2nd, the Drina Corps develops Exhibit P1465. It's the Krivaya 95 attack plan. And it's one of the first things you'll see in that attack plan is the citation to Directive 7 and Directive 7.1. They're looked at together. It's just as valid at that point. We also, if you recall from Krivaya 95 attack plan, Mladić approved it. A copy of that went to the main staff, and remember there's a map that goes with it. Exhibit P1084. Mladić signed it, made a comment on it. That's his approval of that plan. And in that plan, you'll remember the famous language, reduce the enclave to its urban areas, this small area of 1 by 2 kilometers that 35,000 people will be jammed into if it's reduced. And also the language, create conditions for the elimination of the enclave. This is a reflection of the wording of Directive 7. It's approved by Mladić, developed by the Drina Corps. Mr. Mladić also argued that the MUP forces in Srebrenica, that after the initial combat, were acting on their own, not under the command of the Army or Mladić. Butler evaluates the key documents on this point from transcript 16206 to 16209. But that first exhibit that Mr. Butler talks about is P2103. You may recall the 10 July order by then the acting minister, Tomo Kovac. That is an order for Borovchanin to report from the Turnovo front where he is with several units of the special police and other units, and he's to go to the Srebrenica area and report to General Krstić. And Mr. Butler discussed that, what that language to go to General Krstić meant. That meant, in Butler's view, that he was now under the command of the Army. Mr. Butler also, in his testimony and in his report, refers us to Exhibit P2104. It's Article 14 of the law, and it's entitled Use of Police Units in Combat Operations, dated November 29th, 1994. And this describes that when the MOOP and the Army are working in combat together, that the Army is in command, and that the MOOP retains their unit commanders like Borovchanin, but the Army is overall in command. And Kovac's letter is consistent with that law. And Butler speaks to that at 16210 of the transcript. Also, to finish this subject, look at Exhibit P724. This is Borovchanin, the commander of the Special Police Forces. This is what we refer to as his after-action report. It's a detailed description of his unit's actions and movements from 11 July to about 20 July. And one of the first things he notes in it is that he reports to Prvicevac, the forward command post, as you recall, is just south of Srebrenica, south of Bratunac. And he finds Mladić there and reports to Mladić and receives orders from Mladić to go attack Potocari. This, of course, is an indication that Boro is now under the command. Borovchanin is now under the command of General Mladić in the VRS. You may recall that report in Butler's discussion of it, but that his forces have not arrived yet, and so he is unable to attack Potocari that night, but does attack it the next morning, the 12th of July, takes up position around the enclave, around Potocari, and receives more orders from General Mladić on the 12th of July, personally, to go along the road, the Bratunac-Konjević-Polje road, to set up a blockade for the fleeing Muslims, where he is on the 13th and 14th, still obviously under the command of General Mladić. Mladić is giving him orders under his own report. So it's very clear. The special police and the units that are working hard in Potocari, separating people, and working hard along the road, capturing people, are all under the command of General Mladić. Mr. Ivatic also suggested that General Mladić was not involved in or didn't know anything about the Scorpions and their activities in Turnovo when they butchered 6 men on video. Well, let's not forget who those men were and boys. These were people that were last seen in the Srebrenica area. These weren't Sarajevo kids or men. They were reported missing.
Now, when you said Mr. Mladić also suggested that General Mladić was not involved in or didn't know anything about the Scorpions and their activities in Turnovo when they butchered 6 men on video, you said, now let's not forget who those men were. It seems that you're focusing on the victims, and that Mr. Mladić is focusing on the perpetrators of what is seen on the video.
I'm getting to part two of that to respond specifically to that.
Yes, because I never heard Mr. Mladić say anything that these victims did not come from Srebrenica, or so. Let's try to focus exactly, and I said this earlier to Mr. Truddy, let's try to focus exactly on where the disagreement is.
Yes,
please proceed.
The important point there, Your Honor, is that he's trying to separate General Mladić and the VRS from this killing completely. And that my point is that this killing is part of the organized murder operation that was developed by Mladić, as you've seen from the evidence. And so that's the first thing that we need to understand. Mladić cannot escape organized executions of Srebrenica people during this time period. So, but that's point one. Point two is that Mr. Mladić suggested that the Scorpion unit was only working in a coordinated action with the VRS. In fact, he said on page 49, 8 through 10, and I quote, "The Scorpion unit itself was operating in coordinated action as described by Mr. Toynens, rather than being resubordinated to the VRS. This is at transcript page 18715 through 18717, unquote, of Mr. Mladić. Actually, the transcript cited by Mr. Mladić is from the testimony not of Toynens, but of a protected witness, RM 280, who did say the Scorpions were working in coordination with the VRS. He's a low-level person. What Toynens actually testified to was that the Scorpions were subordinated to the Sarajevo Romagna Corps, and that's at transcript page 20671. Citing exhibit P3096, which you may recall is the Sarajevo Romagna Corps daily combat report of 23 July, where its commander, Dragomir Milosevic, refers to the Scorpions twice, and both times under the heading or in reference to our forces. So it's clear from that report cited by Toynens, as you can read yourself, that Dragomir Milosevic has subordinated the forces of the Scorpions as well as some others. And if we can go back to July 1st, we have a report from Borovchinin before he and his units were sent to Srebrenica, exhibit P2102. Borovchinin is reporting on his work with the Scorpion unit. So they're in that combat area around Turnovo, Sarajevo, fighting with Borovchinin. That same law that I referred to applies. When they're in combat together with the army, they are under the command of the army. We see that direct reference in Milosevic's report, so it's clear. Not only are these Srebrenica victims being killed shortly after the fall of Srebrenica, but the Scorpion units, be they created by, as I'm sure you know better than I, the Serbian MUP, at the time, they're in combat operations working with the VRS and the Special Police. Mladić, as a general, takes responsibility for the actions of his units and those subordinated to them.
Mr. McCloskey, if I may just comment, whatever knowledge you have from your earlier work, this chamber only knows anything which is presented in this case in court. You referred earlier to you may, and I'm sure you know better than I.
I'm sorry.
Perhaps I misunderstood that, but it could be understood as a reference to earlier cases we may have heard, which are whatever we heard in those cases, apart from having taken judicial notice of any facts of these cases, are not on our mind at this moment.
I understand, and I'm sure in this case it's clear that who the creators of this unit were, and I don't know precisely where it is in this record, but that's what I mean to be referring to.
You mean to refer to our knowledge from this case? I just wanted to avoid any misunderstanding in this respect.
And you're right. I'm probably thinking of the other case as well.
Yes, which is not on any of our minds. Please proceed.
Understood. Understood. All right. Mr. Mladić went into a rather detailed discussion of the executions at the Yadar River. And I won't be able to do that justice today in the time I have, but I will try to get you back on track to the situation that we actually have there. He first suggested that our pretrial brief, we would call 6 witnesses for the Yadar River and only called 1. But if you look at the pretrial brief, we have a large footnoted reference that is more than the Yadar River. The other people mentioned are from other incidents, such as Kravica. So we do cite the survivor of this incident, RM 314, but you also saw another witness, the nurse that treated 314, Mr. Subasic. Now, Mr. Mladić brought up a medical document that had a reference that CLSS didn't make out, but we could all read, as you saw, a Latin reference to explosiva or something like that. We looked into that in more detail. We are continuing to look into that, but we do believe thus far that this is a reference to explosive injury. And I've informed that to Mr. Mladić, and we will work with CLSS to get you the best Latin translation so that you can see this. But it appears that the medical records are referring to this twice in Latin as an explosive injury. And we do see in other documents that are as part of this case, other medical references, explosive injury as looked at as distinguished between gunshot injury, though we're not absolutely sure yet if this term explosive injury could be referred to as a gunshot injury. We don't see that yet. We'll get back to you on that as we determine that. And in his cross-examination of RM 314 at transcript 10897 to 10899, Mr. Mladić did confront the witness with this medical record, and I quote, "Did they explain that their diagnosis as written implies an explosive injury not related to a bullet?" Answer, well, one could see that the wound was caused by a gunshot wound, not an explosion. So Mr. Mladić confronted the witness denied it, says it's a gunshot wound. Could we look at Exhibit 1440? I know we saw this before and it was a long time ago, but it's a picture of this wound. Please don't broadcast it.
Yes. And a seal not to be shown to the public.
You may recall the Yadar River person was testified that he was at Kornevich Polje in the morning of the 13th, taken in a bus with 15 others, with some soldiers who took him down to the banks of the Yadar River a short distance away, where they were all lined up by the river and shot and fell into the river, and that he was shot in his hip area but was able to survive and go down to the river, where he eventually came out. He also described that he was shot, fell down into the river, and fell on his hip, and which additionally injured it. And he describes it in his statement as one big wound. He went on to describe that the next day he meets a group of Muslims that are in the woods nearby and is treated by a nurse who he knows by name and by what he did, and he gives us the name of Mujo Subasic, who he told his account to and who treated him. You've heard from Mujo Subasic, believe he was a 92 bis witness, who describes, he doesn't know the name of the person, but he does remember about the 14th treating a person who said he was the victim of a mass execution. He thought it was a leg wound, but then he went on to say in a statement that he treated so many wounds he couldn't remember exactly. So you have that corroboration. I don't know what happened to our photograph, but I'll continue on this until we get it.
We were told that the system has some problems to upload some documents. We have to wait.
Okay.
You're referring to the photograph where a small spot, and I think it's marked at more or less at the left back part of the body. Well, we
absolutely
can look
correct.
at it from a distance if the photograph is visible, although from a distance, and shows the undressed upper body of a person with a number 1 to what seems to be some kind of a wound at the left side of the body, and a 2 appearing to refer to what looks as a wound as well, but more in the front, the left front of the body. That's what you're referring to, and that's what we looked at, although from a bit of a distance.
Yes, Mr. President, and you will recall that the witness testified that the entry was from his back, and I think he marked that with a number, and then the exit was from the front side, and I don't know I don't recall what the numbers were, and you can see that the entry is very small and the exit is a bit bigger.
That's clear. You may proceed.
And I would ask you to, when considering the medical conclusion about explosive injury, that you take into account what you see in this actual picture and think about what that wound would have looked like on the 16th when the doctors looked at it after he'd fallen on his hip and bruised it as well, and how accurate a medical conclusion would be in that context. In addition, To further support this witness and his credibility, you'll remember Jean-René Ruiz testified all about what this witness had told him he had experienced. First, Ruiz testified that this witness told him about that he was held in a little guardhouse outside the school in Konjević-Polje, and Ruiz went there and found a little guardhouse type thing outside a school and put it in his book. It's Exhibit 1132 at page 49. He also told Mr. Ruiz that he saw a Muslim named Rezid Sinanovic at Konjević-Polje that day on the 13th. And Momir Nikolić has also testified that Rezid Sinanovic was there, and that he in fact picked up Rezid Sinanovic and took him to the Bratunac military police, to Celanovic with a few others. You may recall Celanovic testifying that he interviewed Rezid Sinanovic. He also told Mr. Ruiz that he was taken to a hangar at the intersection of Konjević-Polje, and you'll see a picture of a hangar at that intersection.
Some time. We take a break and we will resume at 25 minutes to 1 o'clock.
All rise. Veuillez vous lever.